so excited for this particular framing of a talk because, as you may know, Devika and I, in the years that we've been working on the Talks program, have developed this strand of conversations that we call crosscuts, where we look at the entire lineup of the festival and all the filmmakers coming to New York to show their films. And we identify pairings of filmmakers that we would like to bring together into conversation to talk about their films in the festival, as well as their prior bodies of work, their careers, their practices. And I couldn't be more happy to say that this year we succeeded in bringing together tonight's filmmakers. The first, Roberto Minervini, the director of Main Slate selection, The Damned. It's an extraordinary film that follows a group of Union soldiers on a Western frontier during the Civil War. And with Roberto, we're joined by Julia Loktev, the director of My Undesirable Friends, Part 1, Last Air in Moscow, which is the first part of an immense and monumental documentary project that Julia is working on that follows a group of independent journalists in the months leading up to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And my understanding is that the next installment of this project will follow the same journalists in the months after that invasion. So it's very much a continuing conversation. So I want to go ahead and get right into it. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Roberto Minervini and Julia Loktev. Thank you both for your films and for being here. This is a real honor. Your films are some of the highlights of the main slate, in my opinion, and your bodies of work, I think, really lent themselves immediately on, perhaps in ways that are not simple to identify, but on an intuitive level. You came to us as a really sort of a no-brainer pairing. So I think just to get going, could you each speak a little bit about how you see your new films as, or perhaps at the origin of these projects, of the films that you're here with? How did you see them in relation to your existing artistic practice, and particularly with regard to the question of fiction and nonfiction? Julia, your first feature was a documentary, and since then you've followed it with several narrative features. And so with your new film, it's a return to the documentary form, and I'm curious how you see that trajectory in your own work, and what, if you, on finishing The Loneliest Planet, your prior feature, did you know you wanted to return to nonfiction for your next project, or was it sort of an accident?
I never thought I would make documentary. I always thought I was, going to grow up, well, not always, but from the time I wanted to make films, I thought I would be a fiction filmmaker, and somehow the first film, which was about my family, which felt like a film of necessity, was a documentary. And then this film, but I have to say that for making fiction, making documentary has been like the best film school ever, better than the actual film school experience I had. But, and I guess I just think of things as film. I think of every project specifically. And I think in terms of thinking of like a body of work, I feel like that's more for critics to do. I don't think that way. I just think about a specific film and trying to figure out how best to make it. What about you?
Yeah, in truth, I never thought I would make documentaries either. In a way, the idea is similar to what you just said. I wanted to make films, but the point is, there are two things that kind of, made me decide on how to approach cinema. One is the inspiration that I gather from filmmakers. Usually, since a long time, I always, was attracted by the outsiders, those who were perhaps like me, broke and trying to make ends meet, and yet try to find some sort of form of self-expression. We were talking about that a little bit, and the marginal cinema of Brazil. I got acquainted with all that. These people, taxi drivers who shot, within the confines or their own universe, their own communities, and so I was in Texas and I started working like that, and I started meeting people who were great storytellers, definitely greater than, had greater storytelling abilities than my own. And then those films became, like Julia just said, then, they are in the ether, they're out there in the world, and they are labeled. And all of a sudden I found myself becoming a documentarian. And that's kind of beyond the scope of what I was doing and why.
It's kind of strange, like I've thought about it before, that, with writing, we talk about, fiction and nonfiction and how the words are different, and how the strangeness of the word documentary, that it's a document somehow, that makes it sound very not fun, rather than like fiction and nonfiction. And I think these things are, for me, they're much more kind of fluid. Which is, I do respect a certain truth in documentary, but I think that, maybe this sounds corny or pretentious, but, obviously anytime you're making a documentary or nonfiction, you're making a sort of beginning of fiction the minute you choose when to turn on the camera, which direction to point it in, where to go, where not to go. You're already entering a kind of, realm of constructing something, and not just documenting. Obviously you are documenting it. Not to mention that, what happens when you have, say, 300 hours and you're cutting it down to a couple, or 5.5 in my case, or, and then of course, anytime you're making a fiction, you're also documenting let's say you have an actor in front of you. There is, an actual human being that is breathing and, has actual physicality, that has a kind of quality of documentary. And sometimes you're in a space, that has a real space to it. So for me, these things are much more porous.
Yeah, absolutely. It is actually quite dangerous when we start considering documentaries as a testament of some sort of higher truth, right? That's politically very dangerous. For me, documentary is just a testament of an experience, which is by default very personal, and therefore biased, in energetically, politically, ideologically. It doesn't matter. There is a bias, but that is the beauty of it, and I think that is should be more explicit. My documentary work, and I'd be really interested in knowing your experience, especially after this powerful work, because this is the relevance of it, deserves some space. But so I'm kind of introducing this, but then I want to hear the way it is for you, Julia, because for me, I always had it very clear that, kind of paraphrasing what you just said, I met some people, some of them are even here with me, Tim, Leanne, Noah, Judah, Carson, they've been working with me since 2008. And now they've worn uniforms, that they've become, Union soldiers, but was still experientially what we went through was really true, resonates to us, and that's a total experience. So we have a perimeter, we have something, and we inhabit a space which is already artificial. I would have never hung out with some of my subjects, right? And they would never hang out with me if it wasn't for film. So there's a camera, there's a situation, this is our reality, and whatever we do tells only the story of that reality, which will never exist again. So it's just a testament of an experience. And then all of a sudden, my films started getting rejected by the documentary community. The community that labeled me as a documentarian rejected me for not being super partist, for not being distant from my subjects enough, for not being objective. And I said, what is the objective? So you want me to politicize. That's what you all, through the world of ethics of the documentary, you really want me to politicize, to weaponize a documentary, and to abide by some hidden codes of an agenda here, to talk about justice, about good and evil, to start really pontificating over something that has nothing to do with the fact that their experience is just mine, and it's clearly altered, but doesn't cease to be real, but it's personal. So now, and this is, I'm not a moderator here, but I've been wanting to ask you, so since we're here talking, I really want to. But now, when you do that, it was just something I've never done, what you did, right? Then all of a sudden, you were, that is your space, your element. I mean, you were born in Russia, and then all of a sudden you are documenting, you giving space to people who speak about a situation that is not just, whose confines, the confines of your documentary, they're big, because it's what's happening right now that is hitting the whole world, and it might change the fate of how or democracy as we know. So how do you kind of reconcile with the fact that it's your experience, and yet the message is so huge, right? I don't know if, I wanted to trigger that conversation. I've been wanting to ask you that. How do you do that, which is so personal yet so big, which is a little bit different, I think, from my experience?
I just want to add, before we hear your answer. In your Q&A a few nights ago, I wrote it down because it was a beautiful comment. You said, "I can only film people I love," and I think as a documentarian, that's kind of a radical thing, stance to take, and one that sort of flies in the face of any tired ideas about objectivity, and so maybe that's another aspect of this.
I mean, it's not like a principle. It just worked on instinct, Like I ended up continuing to follow the people that I felt a connection with, and there was a complicity with the characters. And for me, there's an interesting aspect to the sense. So it's a film about journalists, and these are people who tell stories every day. So some of them were, did videos themselves. Some of them are, they write, but they're very aware of, the storytelling aspect. So I couldn't not think of them, even, not in a direct way, as in some ways complicit and collaborators in the storytelling, because they knew what they were doing. They knew how a story gets told. I think they were very aware, I assumed, how they presented themselves. You can't not be, because that's what they do all day. There's a scene that happens where one of the characters, I was supposed to meet her, and we were supposed to go to her workplace together. I walked in, and she was in the middle of a phone conversation and started bawling her eyes out. And of course, I started shoving my camera into her face, which is a little bit difficult because she's like 6 inches taller than me. But I'm like trying to reach my camera up into her face as she's crying, and just kind of and I just, stayed there and had to be really close to her and film her. And I felt a little uncomfortable because, I didn't even have a chance, like, are you cool with me filming this? Because she was mid-conversation. And then, we walked out of the cafe, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I felt a little uncomfortable. Sorry, about that. She's like, don't worry, I film people all the time. So there was that, it was an understanding implicit, but kind of coming back. Yeah, I don't know. When I started making the film, I thought something was happening that was big, which was Russia started to name these journalists foreign agents, journalists, activists. And it seemed very, intimate and personal, because in some ways it was very intimate, because they would have to label their stuff, everything, including their Instagram posts, as foreign agents. They would have to report their personal expenses. Like let's say I got this liqueur, I'd have to report it to the government because it's now supporting, a source of mass media, foreign agent. So it was on a very intimate, personal level. But of course, a very big thing was happening. And then a few months later, Russia started a full-scale war. But I was living through it with these characters on a super intimate kind of kitchen, sofa, taxi scale with them. So it was really, it's the scale at which we experience giant events as people living through them. So, I just tried to tell it through the people living it. I don't know if that answers it.
Yeah, no.
And I think that is there's a very strong connection here with The Damned, with this intimate experience of a conflict that we all know as a distant history.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I was interested in hearing that because exactly, I like the fact that everything can be brought down to an experience that is very personal, and it's beautiful that it's something that can expand in scope and in reach, and yet must be brought back to an experience, and that's how authorship, that's what it means, right, to be an author, and in The Damned, obviously, all of a sudden we are stepping into the realm of fiction, right? The Damned is a film is set during the U.S. Civil War, although to be just a little bit more precise, it's set during the U.S. Civil War, when the U.S. Civil War, the gold rush intercepts the U.S. Civil War, so all of a sudden the motives for being deployed in certain territories becomes really murky and even hard to grasp for the soldiers historically. So all of a sudden we decided to create something that was experiential, but we came, we worked together for a long time. We've been in touch for a long time. I've done work that also dealt with some issues like the other side, right? What's going to happen if people revolt? What's going to happen if there's a short circuit between people's motives and institutions? What happens if something crumbles, like institutionally? So I worked on that and what you're going to do when the world's on fire as well. And this time we went to a valley of Helena, Montana. We wore some uniforms and invited even a lot of people from the National Guard. So it was an experience that is kind of happens off camera, but there was something very alive of people really taking, even wearing a uniform very, very seriously and debating and digressing on history very seriously. And then, an experience is not just the topic we're going to talk about, how we frame it, how we shoot it. The experience is also the factors around us, how cold it is, how scarce food is, and how much we're longing to go home, or much we hate or love each other, and all of that creates an experience, and all of that factors into the film. Even their own, because there's also Jeremiah Knapp is also here, there, so there I have 1, 2, 3, 4 people participated in this experience, and all of them, sometimes I would observe them. We stayed there for 2 months in this camp, and some of them got close or maybe distant. I wonder, I never asked them because it's their experience in a way. I never asked them how, if they're still in touch, or some of them might be still friends, or some might not like each other at all. I wonder. I've seen some stuff going on, so I can imagine it. So, all of that created an experience that triggers a reflection on a lot of stuff, right? History and present, and how these two kind of are in dialogue, in conversation with each other. And we could go on from here, but yeah.
I'm curious how you each approach the sort of narrative project of your films, because I think both films are incredibly elegant in the way that they layer the sort of texture, this granular detail of experience, and really immerse us in these lived experiences, while also deploying conversation and small talk and capturing moments in which information is shared and feelings are expressed, sometimes in few words, sometimes even in no words, sometimes non-verbally. But I'm curious how you approach that challenge of really inviting us into these worlds, both experientially but also narratively.
Well, I was thinking, watching your film, how much of the thing is not the thing itself, but all the things around the thing? I don't know if that sounds a little bit vague, but it's how much is, it's a film about a war, but obviously, when we say war, we imagine one particular kind of thing, but there's so much waiting around that, and there's so much of the time in between around that, and what do you do while you wait? And as you said, it's the cold, it's the conversations. There's just so much time around things, and so much detail around things, and the event itself, like the battle you might be waiting, and it's, it's fairly brief, and then there's all of that is around it, and then how do you structure the larger narrative, of course, but.
Yeah, no, it's true, and that's the dilemma, and I feel the way I approach it is so there are different levels, and they're not hierarchical, but there are levels. There is a film to make. There are some narrative, arcs that I'm starting to see, subtexts. And then there is what's also being given to the film by the characters, sometimes spontaneously. And then there's also what's important for them. And there are scenes that are very, and I did that throughout my whole filmography, and maybe you can relate to this. There are moments that are in the film just because they pay justice to what their characters, interpreters, cared about. It's meaningful to them, and perhaps it could be even rhetorical for the audiences. Why is a scene there? Well, a scene's there for many reasons. A film is, it's kind of a, in a way, I always like to say when I think of myself shooting as giving my back to the audiences, and I'm shooting my film, then I have to turn around, and I'm giving my back to my collaborators, and I had to narrate this film or show this film, but I had to be always mindful that at some point I might be giving my back to somebody, but I cannot forget them. So now that the film is done, as I'm giving my back to the experience, I feel pretty content with the fact that a lot of stuff is in there, doesn't, shed some light on who these people are, who they were, and what really was important for them. In my case, there's a conversation about God and the godliness of God and war in a way, and that was a very, very hot topic. It's a conversation that could be straightforward, common knowledge in a way. Yeah, we could all draw those same conclusions, but the way we got to there, how heartfelt it was, and for them to be in there and to film that, really deserved a spot in the film, no matter what, no matter how good for the film it is. So yeah, in a way, that's how I approach a narrative. Reminding myself that I do need to make a film, but I also need to pay justice, to the people who actually contributed to the film with their own stories and emotions and words.
I think something that your films have in common is that they grapple with a conflict or a set of geopolitical, economic circumstances at something of a remove, or with some distance, in the sense that the soldiers in your film, Roberto, are very far away from the main front of the war that's happening. They reference it. It's on their minds. It's a part of the set of motivations that are driving them. But they're on this frontier, and they as you said, Julia, are sitting around waiting a great deal, and trying to make sense of their own reasons for being there, and of their own conviction or lack of conviction for a cause. And I think similarly in your film, Julia, while there's a greater immediacy in the sense of these women are journalists on the ground in Moscow, it's because the film is so embedded in their experience, the enemy is sort of this looming specter that they're looking at very closely, but that doesn't figure into the film as a present character. It's more sort of a condition, a circumstance, a set of immense forces that these individuals are fighting against for their own reasons. This is just a prompt.
No. I know. I'm thinking through it. I'm kind of, and of course, I'm sorry. I have a very expressive face. I just kind of respond. I'm like, maybe. Part of how totalitarianism works is it's, everywhere. That's the idea. So it is not far away. It is very much, the enemy is very much embedded in every aspect of their lives, and they live, in fear of being searched all the time. But here's what I was thinking about this, because I was like, I know we're supposed to talk about our films have something to do with war. I'm like, my film isn't really about, it's not a film shot on the ground in Ukraine. I did film some in Kiev at one point in the second half, but it's not. But, and your film is on the periphery of the war. My film is actually in the very center of the war. It's the thing that is causing the war. It is like, it's very much not the periphery. Moscow is, it is the thing from which the war starts. Now, the effects of that war are felt in Ukraine, but the thing that starts it and the kind of the core is Moscow, and is that culture that is, this is what it emanates from. And that's a very strange thing. Now, all that said, what is the war, the first week of the war, what did it feel like in Moscow? It felt like going, I went to a normal shopping center and it looked like going into the Macy's perfume counter. It was really creepy. I had to buy some hard drives. I mean, I didn't film there. I did in my pocket, but it wasn't very good. But, other than the presence of these police on the streets that people refer to as cosmonauts because they're helmeted, and anyone protesting being arrested, the rest of it is like there's Christmas decorations still up everywhere. And the shopping malls are open. And like that scene I described where the girl is crying, she's crying in a coffee shop. And there were people next to us, on a Tinder date. And that's what I was fascinated by, the fact that that's what war feels like in the society that's causing the war, except for these journalists who are attempting to report and feel very much threatened and very much at risk during that. But for the rest of the society, it doesn't feel like anything. So it's weirdly on the periphery when you're in the very center of it.
Yeah. And for me, an enemy can be someone you're fighting against, but also someone you're fighting for, sometimes politically speaking. And so that makes the identification of an enemy a very complicated matter in history. Politically, the need to identify an enemy is also a major force, a major driving force in a nation's economy. And that has a lot to do with many wars, but also with the U.S. Civil War, which some could say was the abolitionist war, but some others, if we go a little deeper, it's a war that stems from the fact for the complete lack of agreement around slavery, which is a little different. But without getting into that now, but it's a very complicated matter. It's a very territorial war. And that's why we wanted to just go to a frontier land, which would become the hotbed, the scenario for one of the bloodiest 15 years or so of wars that came after the Civil War, which is the American Indian Wars, about 12 years later. And just because those were mineral and gold-rich lands, and the government wanted to put their hands on it, and then they started violating treaties and so on and so forth. So the point is, again, see, I described something about what the U.S. government was plotting. So, and these guys, and we talked about that a lot. So now you're fighting for the U.S. government, and you're fighting against other Americans, other factions. Can you count, who are your allies, who are your enemies? And if you bring it down to something very humane from a human standpoint, from a humanistic standpoint, things get a little more complicated, because in the end, it's this kind of dehumanizing aspect of war that is man killing man, that is, matter to them personally. So not identifying an enemy was in a way, was both a political choice for us to just reflect upon that, what is an enemy, in a way, and it's also humanist, to feel like we refuse to get into this experience only thinking that we must eradicate an enemy, because that is something that is perhaps the root of all problems, this kind of justification of war in a way. So that's how the idea of an enemy-less war, which is never like that, right? And without identifying an enemy, came about, really.
something that you both have in common is having been born outside the United States, but working in modes, in locations, in financial structures that perhaps have some connection to America or the American film apparatus. This is going to be a broad question that I hope sparks some sort of more focused avenues. But nation, I think, is such a prominent theme in both your works here at the festival, but also going back through your prior filmographies. Even in Julia and The Loneliest Planet, it's a film that follows American tourists in or outsiders, not both American, but in a strange land to them that are navigating terrain that is foreign to them. And in The Last Hour in Moscow, of course, it's young Russian women grappling with their government, what the facts of what their government is doing and what their culture has allowed to happen or has colluded with the government to bring into this society. And on the other hand, in The Damned, I think these are, as you've discussed, these are soldiers who don't necessarily have a firm footing with regard to which what it means to have a national loyalty or a loyalty to a particular national structure. And so I'm curious, just if you could maybe each speak about this idea of nation as it relates to what you want your work to accomplish and what you want, what kinds of stories you're drawn to.
First, I think it's, at least for me, there's the Western European self and the American self, and they're always in constant conversation. And I think the Western European self informs the American one, and it allows me to keep a perspective when I work. But not only that, when I just in everyday's life. But talking about even for example, approaching this film. I also am very aware of the federal idea of the imperialist and colonizing Western experience as clearly informed and actually trigger what happened in the United States. So it's very nice to feel. For me, I have a sense of heightened sense of responsibility when I come here, live here, make films in America, and I do have a broader perspective, understanding where I'm also coming from. So I think that's the beauty of having roots that kind of, in my case, go across the Atlantic Ocean and they're planted there too. And I kind of, with this idea of planting roots, I got lost. What was the... No, yeah, I know it was a broad question, but there was something else I wanted to say. Anyway, it come to me. But anyway, this is, for me, it's very clear that I have this duality, and that it's in constant dialogue where I work here and when I live here, but it's tough though, because in the end, a little bit like the work we do, and then all of a sudden you have to be labeled and you have to be validated. The same is happened to me for a long time. It's still happening that I'm labeled an outsider, right? You can be an insider, outsider, so either or, right? Documentary fiction, you're an outsider. So I continue to be labeled an outsider, which is very limiting and of my experience, which is clearly not that of an outsider. It's of an insider-outsider. I'm both.
Yeah, I'll pick up maybe from the insider-outsider thing. So I was 9 when I moved from the Soviet Union to pretty quickly to Loveland, Colorado. So I'm also, quite American and grew up, with a place where a high school seemed like a reason to have a football team. So I've always felt, which I think just gives me a sense of both being kind of presuming to be an insider wherever, and I look like many different, I could fit many places, so, and also never quite being of one thing. So I think for me, it's much more that. And it also creates a very funny situation for me when I go back to Russia. Like, I've never been a citizen of the Russian Federation. And actually, I had to fill out like a festival form, and they had to like put where were you born, and the only option for me was Russian Federation, and I'm like, that makes me cringe. I'm like, I was not born in the Russian Federation. It didn't exist then. But I speak Russian without an accent, except I have enormous gaps in my cultural knowledge. And so I just sound really stupid to some people because, I haven't really lived there since I was 9. So I pass like I'm from there, and it's part of what made the characters super comfortable with me, but they'd refer to tons of like pop culture or whatever. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it kind of allowed me that insider-outsider position in this film, like allowed me to make the film because they were comfortable enough with me because I was just like kind of like their own homie, kind of spoke the language. But they had to explain everything to me because I really didn't know everything. So it was a perfect, I think I like that inside-outside perspective as a constant way of being wherever you are,
Yeah. But talking about war, I was thinking, I don't mean to stir controversy or anything, but there was something interesting that struck me since the beginning of my, American chapter of my life, which is, goes back, long way. It's the fact that in America there's this but part of the country, but definitely you hear a lot about the distrust with the institution, which is put in correlation with independence and freedom. And yet when it comes to war politics, there's total faith, blind faith. The government can do anything wrong. In New York, this might sound weird, but in other parts of the country, this seems to be somewhat true. That there is a total faith in the motives, in the justness of war action and war intervention, and that is something that in my country of origin, I couldn't find, and I think this this pushed me to really go deeper and deeper and deeper into kind of researching, accumulating knowledge around American domestic and foreign policy and the difference between the two, and I think in a way all this discourse, which is an inner, sometimes very turbulent discourse, I think culminated into the damned, and it culminated into the fact that the damned is made, really is born, made around this ultimate, this question really, can we trust the fact that we are going to war? Can we, to which extent, and who do we need to trust, and really why? Is this really inevitable? Anyway, I just wanted to throw it out there because that is something very specific compared to my country of origin, of the United States, and the way politics work.
That presents an interesting parallel with Julia's film and the audience of these journalists, and this sense, this sort of overwhelming sense in the film that they are speaking truth to an audience that may not be entirely receptive because of this blind faith in a government, in a state. And I think so much of the sort of emotional fuel of Last Air in Moscow is this tension between Russians who don't have this blind faith or blind trust in what their state is doing, and those who do. And how do those groups, how can you bridge that distance or difference? And I'm curious if that particular dynamic defined some of the sort of conversations that you brought to the fore in your editing process, for instance.
Well, I think they would all love to be speaking and reaching the people who have blind faith. But also, I think in Russia, it's not that there's that many people who have blind faith. It's actually not blind faith that makes all of this work. It's apathy. It's not, one of the things that keeps coming up in the film, and I think it actually is relevant in the States completely. I'm not even sure. I don't think that it's blind faith that, is how we think about wars here very often. One of the things that keeps getting repeated in the film is that so many Russians, they have this lovely phrase, I'm outside of politics, like they have other things to think about. And that is how Putinism works. I think it's shifted a little bit. That level of faith is one of the successes, of Putin in starting the war, the full-scale war, is it's a little bit more passionate engagement probably now, but I don't know. I haven't been there in 2 years. But I think it's exactly that sense of like, you let the politicians deal with politics, and we don't mess with that. Just go have dinner. Worry about your personal life. Don't stick your nose in places. And I think that for the independent journalists, first of all, the people they're speaking to most, and they all continue to work in exile, are other people who don't feel they can speak. Right now, if you're opposed to the war in Russia, and if you speak about it publicly, you can get arrested. So it's incredibly helpful, the work they do, to kind of make people feel not alone and to give them a sense of community and society. But of course, they all want to speak to not the people who agree with them already. They all dream of speaking to at least, okay, maybe not the people who are, having blind faith, but it would be really great to get the people who don't care about politics to start caring about politics and start caring what's going on here. And if you can touch that and, get them to feel and care about what's happening to their country and what their country is doing, I think that's the dream.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think that has to be, kind of some sort of a grassroots, kind of movement in a way. And I think cinema can do something about that. And perhaps, with the perhaps it's not so grand ambitions, but I think the idea of starting a film, making a film that starts from the personal experiences, so sometimes it's experiential, that gives, shed light on the individuals and their own set of beliefs and hopes and political and ideological views. I think it's a way to actually, kind of reach the discourse that cannot continue to be top down. Right? It has to be from the bottom up. And I think that's how you, hopefully, again, within the context of cinema, I think that's probably how a conversation can start, where you hear dissenting voices and you start hearing how people, refuse to kind of abide by some of the codes that have been dictated from the higher floors, right? And I think I read a criticism of the film that came from the National Review, so it came from the they would say the right or far right faction of the country, and it was about the fact that a film that puts into question even a war and the meaning of a war, a film that shows the fragility of these people, in a way, the insubordination. That's what the film did. People say, I have my own experience, I have my own thoughts. It's anti-American. And the film was called the Trojan horse of the Sears Festival, that undermines America like Democrats like to do. And I felt like, man, like, wow, okay, if I could
well done.
undermine. And some people were saying he should go back to his country. It's like, okay, well, great, man. That's the most attention I've gotten, like, in so many years of career. Like, great. But I'm not going back to my country, especially now that I moved to New York after 14 years in Texas. I'm staying here for sure. I'm in a constant honeymoon with city and its people. But apart from that, and then you hear like, as soon as Americans, in a film, humbly speaking, really, but again, they gave me a microphone, so I'm going to say, but I don't mean to amplify this. It's just my film, okay? But in our experience, just a few of us that were in this experience, they had their opinions, they had their voices, they felt free to say, I don't know why we need to fight, all of that. And that is not anti-American. That is actually that is actually to the core of what America, and that's what Julia was saying, those who actually have won the right to dissent and not to be that blind faith. And I felt that it's very American, and this America I got to love, right? Of people saying, I dissent.
What can I? It's just, let me see if I can formulate a thought. It might take me a second. Bear with me. This is more getting into, I guess, the second half of my film, which follows all of the characters in exile, because the first half that we're screening now, part one, ends at the end of the first week of the full-scale war. And then there's a second half that follows them in exile. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot as I followed these characters in exile, because they're all Russians who are opposed to the war, how much they feel part of it, how much they can't wash their hands of it. And I was thinking how different that is to my experience as an American. I mean, I was against the Iraq War, I protested, but did I feel it was something that I was somehow complicit in? Am I used to people speaking that way about Iraq and Afghanistan? Not really, I mean, these are people who are constantly apologizing for this thing, which obviously they themselves do not support, did not cause, but have a constant sense, of that this is not something other that is caused by other people that I have nothing to do with, that this is, they will say, my country is bombing Ukraine, and they will start every sentence that way for a certain period of time. And that kind of self-reflection that they go in, I don't recall people who were opposed to wars here speaking that way that I was aware of that much, and I found that fascinating.
Yeah, and maybe, maybe it's true. It's blind faith was not. It's too heavy-handed. But I blame the Italian self. Like that guy doesn't speak English, but let me take over here. No, but that's where I'm getting. I think precisely. I lived 14 years in the South, and even attending sports games, and I felt even not standing up to, and saluting a hero or a war veteran during a basketball game would be a political act for which you took risks in public, was not tolerated, was not part of a open political debate. To do that and to sit down and not stand, and it was getting dangerous. And we talked about this too. We talked about this, and we were talking about how violent that feels. Like if you don't stand up, if you take your hat off and all that, you're risking. Yeah, it can get dangerous, it can get really nasty, and I fear for myself, for my family in some situations, and that is, it's not blind faith, but it's the refusal to see. That actually, and the refusal to see is the refusal to tolerate. And in the end, we're talking about tolerance, the open space where we can all, be, able to dissent, and to even claim ownership, to hold ourselves accountable. And it's true that to say, living in the South, if I can think of me saying, we are bombing Iraq, I think, in some situations could have gotten really scary, right? And again, you know what I mean, right? When I say the South, I'm not generalizing, but that in New York it might not happen. In other parts of the country it might happen, and this is all about creating safe spaces for, in the end, it's that. Are we safe enough to speak up? And when that is not a sentiment that is clear, then perhaps we're not really living in such a safe democratic heaven, right? And I'm not talking about America, I'm talking in general, right? We do feel safe enough to even hold ourselves accountable. And this is, again, something that we try to kind of process in the film as well.
I'm thinking about The Damned. I'm curious about the choice to focus on a prior conflict, a prior moment in history, and both in terms of what that meant with regard to your practice of sort of, rather than inviting your cast to play versions of themselves, you're inviting them perhaps to play projections of themselves back in time, and was that, your film The Other Side is very much of its moment in American life, and this film feels as though it's gesturing at the current moment from a historical period, but with sort of still a documentary kind of commentary on the moment in which it was made. And could you speak about how you thought about that kind of temporality?
So that, the idea evolved over time. We started from a place of fiction. So this is a context. This is fiction. Okay, it's referential to a time, referential to events. And now, how can we bring it down or to something that is more experiential? So it took a long time, and Jeremiah and Tim, we collaborated as credited in the story of the film. So it took a lot of time, a lot of conversations, a lot of discussions around how to make it relatable. We created characters that were not to which we didn't relate anymore. So in the end, we kind of put ourselves in a situation to just gather from who we were. I mean, and I think that the choice to be in a kind of a terra franca in a way, kind of at the margins of the Civil War, really, there a few scuffles have been documented in those lands, but really it's not the hotbed of the Civil War. And so, and again, nobody was from there, none of us, then the core group was from there. So all of a sudden we just could gather only from within. And I think, if I had filmed this film in Virginia, it would have been a very different film. The weight of history, written history, would have been much heavier, right? But so there was something freeing about being put in a position where we could only write the story from within. And
remind me, I know it was set on the frontier, but I can't remember. I know you filmed in Montana. It was set somewhere out west, but do you say where? Or you just
we don't. I think we said in the card in the beginning. We just said that this is Montana in 1862, which is the year where the gold rush started in Montana, and that was Dakota Territory at the time. It wasn't even a state, right? So we set it there. Which was this land that is still unknown, of unclear. Kind of perimeter in a way. Everything was kind of unclear. What's under the soil is unclear. I think that's we did that so that we could gather from ourselves. And there's some anecdotes that are not in the film there. For me, they're really I'm gonna call out. Noah, remember? Noah, you remember there was something really interesting for me that kind of exemplifies what happened in the film. Like Noah, from Texas, Waller, Texas, near Houston. We've known each other for a long time. And then Noah is there participating. Like he accepts the fact that he's been drafted by the U.S. Army, although he lives in the South. And there was a scene where he was talking about, this killing others, the enemy. It was about the enemy and all that. And he was saying about something that he was saying, look, we started talking about General Grant. I was like, I don't think he's so great. But yes, he is. I mean, he leads us as a nation. But I do want to point out that I don't know if what he did. I don't like everything he did. So he started becoming referential to his own, first of all, his own views. Second, his own experience of living in another land. And I think that the fact that they were, they brought their experience and they brought the origin, they brought the beliefs, the value into the film. And that was really great. And that moment was the funniest, but also one of the greatest behind the scene moments because it's kind of, I'm not going to just play a role here. If you mention Ulysses Grant, I'm going to say, yeah, sure, great man, but also have a lot to say about it. So if we're going to talk about it, it was really, really interesting. Like, this is who I am. And this is what I believe in, and this is what I'm going to bring into the experience.
And I think with Julia, I would pose not the same question to you, but I think temporality is also a key factor in experiencing and understanding your film in that it's defined by this before and after, and this build up to an event that, perhaps the subjects anticipated to varying degrees but didn't know when it was going to happen. And then the end of the film is the invasion happening, and that is the sort of turning point that will lead us into the second part of the film. But watching it today in 2024, 2 years after the invasion, it's a funny experience of sort of a time warp to watch these women anticipating something that we know is about to happen, and that we, minute by minute, watch it unfold. And I'm curious if your relationship to this kind of temporality or this understanding of the before and after has changed over the last few years of working on this film and releasing it, and how that informs the film's sort of political position.
Well, it's really weird. Somebody has said to me that basically all 4 of my films somehow had a breaking point in the middle and were all about a before and after. I mean, I remember when I made my first film, there was this Blanchot quote that kind of stuck with me that was like, the disaster ruins everything, all the while leaving everything intact. And somehow that's, this event has, I didn't mean to, honestly. It's just, you keep doing things in a, this one, the event wasn't my fault. But it wasn't part of the plan. I didn't know it was going to happen. Obviously, when I started filming the film, I thought it was going to be a film about, I remember even in the middle of February 2022 telling someone that I thought it might be a slow burn of a film of people trying to figure out when to leave your country, how long do you keep fighting, when do you choose when to leave, which is what the film was when we started out making it. All of these journalists felt an increasing crackdown. They all had a sense that things were going to get worse. They kept saying things were going to get worse, and they were trying to work there, but they really did not anticipate the full-scale invasion. The war had been going for like 8 years in a kind of way the world seemed to find acceptable, which shouldn't have. But of course, it transforms everything. And there is that experience of watching it. You're right. We know that Russia is going to start a full-scale war in Ukraine, and we're watching these people as they're trying to figure out, like, how bad is it going to get? What do we do? And you want to scream and tell them, get out now. But you're watching them go through this, and I don't know, has it changed the political position? My political position is very clear. The war is wrong. The war is awful. Russia's committing war crimes. There's not a lot of flexibility and things to change there, But I'm also, again, I'll talk about the second part a little bit because it's something I'm getting into editing. The first part is structured in 5 chapters, and each chapter is its own moment in time. It's a very specific, sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's like a few days, of a particular moment in time. It's almost like this ticking clock towards what we know is going to happen. And now it's really interesting for me dealing with the second half, which is exile, which is a very different kind of time. It's by nature indefinite. All of these people have absolutely no idea. They haven't immigrated somewhere. They're all living in this bizarre suspended state. They can't go back to Russia at all until Putin dies, and probably not, they're not hoping for great things after either. But this bizarre, mushy time of exile, and we pick up with them right immediately after, where things are happening really fast and they're disoriented. They don't know what country they're going to, but then it becomes a different kind of time. So I'm really, ask me in a while when I've edited that, but temporality is super, super important to me. But time kind of, I think that reflects our experience of time. Like, time is not, our experience of time, it's stretchy, some things, sometimes it's moving extremely fast and then it's going very slowly.
I was just thinking, that at least two of the journalists I know of from your film, they've been receiving so many death threats in Prague, right? And the two ladies are such danger now. And
One's been poisoned. Some of them been have had death
it's
threats.
just-
I mean, not successfully, thankfully, poisoned, not too successfully, somewhat successfully. But yeah, no, they all thought that, I mean, and you look at it differently now. There's scenes and, you know, they talk about, I think in the second episode, they're like, oh, it's so different. When we were working in Prague for a couple of weeks on the Pandora Papers, you could walk around safely there, as opposed to me coming home here in Moscow and seeing a creepy guy hanging around my apartment, you know, and feeling like I can be raided anytime. Well, now they're discovering, you know, with the Secret Service following Russian exiles and Russian opposition figures abroad, they're not that safe abroad either. Not to mention if they step foot in Russia again.
Yeah.
I have more of my own questions, but I'd want to open it up to the audience because I'm sure there are some. So there's a mic that'll come around. Take this one right in the front first, if we can just run the mic down.
Sorry. Should I just ask?
You want mine? Come on over.
Thank you so much for this talk. It's like amazing to be able to like ask you questions. I was gonna ask Julia about like a very particular part in not actually a part, but like just the element in My Undesirable Friends. I was curious about how, like, because they talk about like Harry Potter a lot, and I was curious if that happened like naturally, like organically, or did you? Because I think it's beautiful that you managed to find something incredibly sentimental for them, and it's like it's kind of like an unspoken agreement that they keep talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, they do talk. They constantly refer to Harry Potter as a way of understanding Russia, but that's because a lot of them are like 23 years old. And no, I was just amazed, and it was like they nonstop trolled me and tried to call me a boomer because I had not read or watched. You know, I had not read a single Harry Potter book. Did not get their references. I do know who Voldemort is now, but you know, it's good and evil. There's somebody, you know, that's there for them. I mean, Harry Potter was huge in Russia. And so, yeah, they did after the screening. They're like, oh, my God, can you please tell people we read things other than Harry Potter? Like, Ksusha would, like, take photos and be like, I'm reading Audre Lorde. But, yes, they do remarkably. I mean, I could not believe how much they referred to Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings as well. But, you know, Ukrainians do as well, like TikToks around the war. I mean, I think those things were huge there. And it is, you know, an understanding of good fighting evil, I think.
In a way, it's a religious analog in some ways, or to religious narratives.
Clearly, I don't get the references.
Yes. Here's the mic.
Thank you. Thank you, Maddie. This has been really a great conversation, very enlightening and thought-provoking. And so are both of your films. I really was engaged with both of them. With your film, it was just very much more intimate, but the conversations are staying with me, and I really appreciated how there were all these not only views expressed, but also the conversation and people opposing each other and, you know, like questioning like what the people are saying. Like one says, you know, he doesn't care, and then the other one says, no, you actually, I don't believe you. And yeah, I really thought that we are on the ground with them, and I really love that. And this conversation is just really personal to me because I feel like kind of like between the two of you, I grew up in a totalitarian regime in Central Europe and became an American, and now it's like half point of my life, one side, the other side, and like speaking of nations to me seems so obsolete. And living in America, I realized after quite a long time living here that I cannot live here as the other, and it's my responsibility to actually absorb me being American, and with that, all that comes with it, and it's kind of heavy. With your film, I'm obviously coming from Central Europe. I'm from Prague, so
It's like, I want to know where.
I'm from Prague, and so it's like Russia, of course, is like this looming big country that has done a lot of bad for me, for my country. But you know what you said about Russians now feeling very responsible for the war. I wonder, I never felt that it was always like that, and I would wonder that it's because it seems like they're hitting their own in a way, that it's like it's really. Ukraine is right next door. It's our, we are very, us Russian are being really related to that piece of land and the people. And I wonder if Americans, I don't know about Mexico, if they would suddenly feel more responsible for the war than now.
Well, I want to be very clear. The people who are feeling very responsible for it are pretty much not the people who are causing it. The people who should be feeling guilty about it seem to not be feeling guilty or bad about it at all, which is the problem. You know, it's the people who are opposed to the war who are taking responsibility. But the other people don't seem to be feeling very responsible, as they should be.
Hello. There is a speech word like nothing about us without us. My name is Valentina, and I'm from Russia, from Siberia. I never lived in Moscow, and I can say what I think about what's going on. I don't think about our president as a personality. I always think about this system that presented in Russia after communist Soviet era. And I always think in how many families could migrate from Soviet Union, this percentage. And I don't think it's about empathy of the people inside of Moscow or Russia. I think about its empathy of the world. Because my piece of Russia is Siberia. It's the biggest reservoir of minerals, gold and oil for the world. And how many Russian people could travel abroad? Traveling is education. And for people who just lived whole life in Soviet Union, for the most of the people, it's impossible till now just to travel. You need a visa. Now it's no visas anymore, but it's obviously necessary for most of the people in Russia to see life outside of Russia, or for any person who was born in the Soviet Union. And I want to say, with this system, who really can help to renovate the system? All I see our gold forest, animal fur goes abroad for sales anywhere. And I just see that it's consuming of rich people inside of my country, of Western goods, American cars. One oligarch can own 43 households in Europe. How is it possible? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
If they...
Hi, Julia. Question for you. You mentioned that that you've never held Russian nationality. I was just curious how the process was to go and film in Russia and do all these things as an American citizen.
Well, Russia started giving visas again. I mean, you know, I was a Soviet, to kind of go back. I was born in the Soviet Union. We had Soviet citizenship. We were stripped of our Soviet citizenship when we left. And as my mom reminds me, we had to pay for the privilege of having our Soviet citizenship taken away. And, you know, 5-6 years later, we were naturalized as Americans. I got a visa. Russia started giving visas after COVID. They gave me a 3-year visa, which I believe expires this week, possibly. I think it was like mid-October. I think it expired actually, it was like, yeah, October 7th or something. I did not get to use all 3 years on it. And, you know, yeah, I was coming in there. I didn't have journalistic accreditation. I had to be incredibly careful about filming in public because, you know, you do need journalistic accreditation and a press vest and all of these things. So I tried to lay pretty low. And then the first week of the full-scale war, you know, the U.S. was telling all American citizens to get out. And I was like, I'm just going to stay until all my characters, you know, as long as my characters are here. And this was, it was before Evan Gershkovich was arrested. It was about a year before, so that's something important. And Brittany Griner had been arrested, but I was like, well, I'm not a famous basketball player. Nobody knows who I am. So I did, there were certain things, like in the film, you know, I didn't go film protests, for example, because that was a place that it was not safe for me to be filming with my American passport, you know, in the street. Not because I was afraid of getting, I mean, honestly, I was a little bit thinking in a very selfish way at that way. I wasn't thinking, I was like, I want to get my footage out. This is like what I'm shooting is important. I'm not going to take a risk. So I had the characters themselves would shoot something like that. So it was strange being, you know, I was staying in this hotel that every time I came out of it, it happened to be on the main plaza that people usually protest on, and they cracked down on the protests so much that they basically lined the entire, like I have to describe this scene. First you have this giant plaza. In the center of it are these enormous, gigantic, like holiday lights decorations that Moscow would keep up like there to, you know, cheer people up because it's dark through the end of February. It's like crowns and Christmas lights. I mean, they're huge. They're like building size, you know, and I'm looking out, and this is all ringed by police vans and this wall of like helmeted police that are facing me like every time I have to go out my hotel room. And I'm like, okay, going about little business, not carrying anything, you know. So, yeah, I just tried to lay low. I was happy to get out when I did.
I'm sorry to say that we're out of time. This has been such an extraordinary conversation, and I just want to let the audience know that both films will be playing again in the festival. You can find the schedule on our website. The Damned is playing later this very evening, so if you haven't gotten a chance to see either, I strongly, strongly urge you to seek them out, and thank you all for being here. Thank you both so, so much.
Thank you.